Claire and Jess were up here earlier, but we have the addition of a new person, Allison Brehm. Say your last name.
You did it absolutely correctly.
Is it Brehm?
Yes, that
my
never
God.
happened. So thank you.
I really like to say people's names right, but I don't often manage it. Allison is from Wiley, as in John Wiley and Sons. So I'll let you talk a little bit about what you do there and how you are involved in what aspect of AI conversations / AI licensing in your company.
Absolutely. Nice to see all of you. And this is so amazing. I've never been to a BISG event and I look forward to going to more. So thank you. So Allison Brehm, I'm Associate General Counsel at Wiley, and I lead a global team of attorneys and paralegals and contract specialists that look after our IP, commercial, and product legal matters. So it's really an end-to-end team from the creation of content, manuscripts, books, scholarly journals, all the way through to licensing and distribution. And again, it's legal aspects. And while I'm here today, I'm not here to give legal advice or disclose anything confidential on behalf of Wiley.
Yeah, this is, of course, always true. We're not waiting for, I mean.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
No. It's important to say and say out loud. The point of this panel is for you all to get some insight from people who are actually doing AI licensing in a variety of ways and who are engaging in their companies in conversations about AI, even we might touch on even with regard to use of AI in their publishing processes. For some of you, this will be, a big shocking revelation, but for others of you, it will be quite clear. If I asked you right now, how many of you have used AI in any way, shape, or form, would you be embarrassed to raise your hand? I see a few. If you haven't and you're going on vacation, I suggest you ask ChatGPT to help you with your itinerary, okay? And I can talk more about that later. This whole world, if we talked about it at the end of December, we'd have had a conversation. It would have been fascinating and interesting. And here we are 1 month later, and a million new things have happened and much has changed and everything is in motion. And we're all on a surfboard, riding the wave, riding the tsunami that Simon told us about this morning. It just is constantly changing. We're not trying to nail anything down here. We're not trying to, completely define the situation. We're trying to take a snapshot. However, I am a very simple person. And I have been in rights my whole life. I was a publisher briefly, but rights, right? And I see things in a rights frame. And I think it's possible to think about AI licensing in a rights frame. Like, the very first deal I made was second serial syndication to newspapers. And I'm talking about the same stuff still, even if it's AI. Admittedly, some complexity, et cetera. So we'll get to some of that. I hope you will all ask questions. Again, everyone here has full measure of what they will and will not talk about, and we shouldn't imply or take any offense or have any inferences made by what they can and can't talk about. But I think we can go through a couple of things. So, level setting, all of your companies have been involved in various kinds and levels of digital licensing for many years, right? So in the scholarly world, lots of digital activity. Not talking about selling ebooks individually to readers, right? Digital stuff. I mentioned earlier the subscription platforms, for example. There's a lot of other licensing that goes on that's digital. We have other folks in the room who are doing that kind of digital licensing. So that alone might be an eye-opener for some people here. And, you should find out more about it and see what's going to be possible for your kinds of content. All of you also have your own platforms for content where you present your content digitally and perhaps even via a subscription, or it's open access content that's available freely. So it's out there already. Digital. AI is the next step. So let me try and find a question for you here. Talk a bit about how your company approaches a request from an AI company. Or would you rather do the definitions first? LLM, RAG, SLM.
We could start with some framing. Do you want to?
For definitions, you mean, or
Sure.
because I feel like that's probably more your.
I feel like it's up to the technologists in the room.
Yeah, I would say I'm a layman when it comes to technology. So, that anything I say, just take with a pinch of salt.
I like to say pillar of salt.
But I guess, LLM is a large language model. Probably most people know that. There are different types of technology involved in that. We have RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, which my understanding is that you have like a pool of content that you will query to get answers to a specific question that you have. And then the AI will come back to you with an answer based on that content in that repository. I've never dealt with a small language model, so maybe you can talk about that.
Right. So I'm just thinking of what to share, where we are. So yes, an LLM, a foundational model, and that will be built through training, pulling massive data sets in and assigning weights and measures to those. And then you've got your foundational large language model. Then the retrieval augmented generation, you'll get more discipline specific or current information, maybe through a live feed. Small language model, from my understanding, is just really focused on certain areas and disciplines, and that might be more pertinent for a pharmaceutical company or some other corporate customer, some specialized industry. You might focus more on the small language model that is built upon information relevant to that industry.
So the thing that we read about in the news all the time is that there are these giant AI companies that trained their systems on content from the internet, right? And there are many lawsuits out there with regard to that understanding, right? And there are also now, we've been reading about news companies and publishing companies that have made deals to allow the use of their content in these in the training of these large language models. I guess from a publisher point of view, I think all of us start at the same place, right? Someone has approached me, they'd like to license some of my content. Let me figure out, do I have the rights to that content? So you've all done that, and you're all aware of what rights you have and don't have. Do you want to say something about that?
No, I was going to say, firstly, like, engage with them. They're the ones that are coming to you. This is a Wild West a bit, these massive generative AI machines, but someone who's coming to you to try and do the right thing is to be applauded, and make sure you engage with them. Even if you don't know the answer, definitely respond to the email, keep them in a conversation straight off. That's my first piece of advice if you hear from someone, because so many people are doing this without asking.
Yeah, I mean, again, first rule of rights, right? You got someone found you and wants to do something with your content, talk to them.
And it really helps with some of the legal issues that are being faced in courts across the world, whereas a lot of companies make an argument that content is there for fair use purposes when it comes to training models. But anyone who's coming to you, I absolutely agree. You want to applaud and support that effort and create that licensing market.
It is overwhelming because of the noise in the news, and it's just like all the time. We're in copyright, we're worried about that, but don't try not to be overwhelmed, and don't just panic and send it to your lawyers and be like, do start to think about what they're asking for. And then my next thing is that I'm always saying to people is like, stop thinking about it as AI and look into what they're asking for. So, you might have a request for something, and it could just be that they want to have a go at building a training model for quite a specific field for a purpose. it might be okay. It might be all right to get your content into there. Make sure you only license it for that. Don't let them slip in any like, but we're going to do this with the outputs in the contract. Just make sure you know what it is, so they can try that. Then if they realize that there's some value in that, what they've done, they want to go to the next stage, you've got to come back to you, and you've got to, you can discuss whether or not that is appropriate with your content. So don't just hear AI and like be like, oh, panic, and look at what it is exactly they're asking, and go back to them and say, can you explain a bit more what your goal is with this?
So you have very specific content really related to a single topic, although it's diverse across nursing, it's nursing content. So people come to you for that.
Yeah. So
because of your brand
AI is
imprimatur.
AI is big in medical, as I think everybody knows, and there's quite a lot of cool stuff happening with tools to aid, patient outcomes and that kind of thing. So, but that content has got to be curated, peer reviewed. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be right. People that are doing cool stuff with AI in medical fields, they can't just grab a load of, like dross off the internet and think that they're going to create a good product with that. So they need published content, curated content for those kind of things.
Right. And I guess at Sage, there's a wide range of topics or titles or subjects. So do you find people coming to you for niche topics, or is it more like, hey, Sage, you got a lot of stuff?
Yeah. And I think this actually goes back to what you said, how fast things are changing, right? Because initially it was very much, the tech companies wanted everything they could get their hands on. They want large volume to train their models. And now it kind of seems like that is evolving a bit, and they're looking more at subject specific content, smaller, maybe not English language anymore. It definitely has evolved, and maybe they want more quality content. They want to make sure it's high value stuff. It's definitely evolved. So yeah, I think it's a bit of both.
There's trends emerging,
Yeah.
even though it feels quite new.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, again, we said, don't hide your little rights light under a bushel. I think publishers have to be very clear. It's part of the whole case for being a publisher, that our content has huge value based on what we have done to create this content. It's not just going straight from the research desk onto a website, and it is peer reviewed. It's been edited and checked and quality controlled, if you will. And there's a big difference in terms, this has always been true, right? And even in situations where there's competing to nursing societies, or, there are reasons why this content has a tremendous amount of value based on what a publisher has done with that work and the context that it appears in within a journal, for example. Wiley, as I know well, has a vast amount of content in a lot of categories. And what I still think is true, though, I want to ask you, because this is sort of the trade mentality, and sometimes authors can get very concerned about their title. My book is going to be, the AI people are going to steal my book, but no AIs have ever shown up on your door to say, there's this one title from 1982 that we would really like to get our hands on, right? That's not what AI is. It's not a one-to-one.
Scale. Right.
Yeah, which is the other reason why publishers are engaging in some of this. And it doesn't necessarily work for authors to directly engage with AI companies, or even agencies who are looking really rightly from their business model point of view at an author's career. They don't tend to think of, we have this whole bunch of stuff at our agency that we can license out. That's not the way an agency works.
I was just going to, speaking of scale, we are going to do this, but we should also talk about collective licensing in this area, because I think that is really important, because despite what I have just said about how some stuff is really targeted and really specific, other people, they're doing projects where they just need a lot of content. And it's very difficult for them to get, go to all the publishers and clear all the rights and make sure they're clearing all the same rights. So that's collective licensing has got a big role to play there. And, there's a level of protection there because you've got them between you and the organization.
Yeah. So Michael's here, and Copyright Clearance Center has a collective licensing product, wrong word. And I think, again, people might not understand quite what that means. Let's say I'm a big AI company and I want to create an engineering collection. Let's call it a collection of information that I'm then going to have engineers use. I don't just want 5 engineering books from Wiley. I want a lot of engineering books, and they're from a lot of different publishers, and I want to do it quickly. So one of the ways that I can get access to a lot of engineering titles, let's say, is if those publishers have pre-authorized their books to be in a collection, say at PLS or at CCC, that somebody could go there and an AI company could go there and say, I'd like to engage in this license with you, CCC. And CCC says, yes, we have a lot. And we've made arrangements with these publishers. After you pay us, Mr. AI, we have an arrangement to pay back the people who've allowed their content to be in our repertory. That's an oversimplification. We don't know what the terms are. We're not talking that. I'm just saying it's an opportunity. It's like a one-stop shop to get a lot of content in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this, by the way, going back to my basic rights terms, and how I think of things in such a simplistic way, first thing we talk about is, well, will it be exclusive or non-exclusive? All of this is non-exclusive, correct? You're not, or do you sometimes see it exclusive?
It'd be really difficult to have exclusivity around this, and you don't know what you might be cutting off in the future for yourself.
Yeah.
If you did do that. So,
yeah. And so non-exclusive, do you find companies coming to you asking, what's the value of backlist versus front list? And let's talk a little about journals, because backlist journals are not really a thing, right? Journals are all forward going and they age out by definition, right? That's supposed to be what science is, right? Today, I discovered that these 2 things are linked, and now somebody else read that on open access, and they've looked at their research, and now these 3 things are linked. That's me in science, guys. But the point is to then eventually, in 5 more generations of linking bits of science together, you have a cure for acne. Let's go low. So
the AI tools are hoping to make these links that humans would never make. I mean, we haven't talked about text and data mining, but it's like, that is what that is really.
Right.
And that's sort of cousin to AI, a human would never be able to look at that much content in that shorter space of time and identify these links that could result in some really good breakthroughs.
And I think where journals come into play is it's actually twofold. It can be for foundational models. Journals, depending on, your portfolio, might not have as many words as books, but they're equally valuable in terms of words and content. But then where they really come into play is on those discipline specific type opportunities and the RAG.
Right,
model.
when they're looking at a specific question.
Yes.
Discipline.
Exactly.
And then books, do you feel like it's important to make a distinction between the value of a book that's 10 years old versus the value of a book that's 1 year old? Does that come up for you?
Yeah, I mean, not really, I would say, but again, because we're talking about scale, right? So they just want as much content as they can get, mostly. So
from today backward.
Yeah.
And
so
maybe next year.
I mean, in my experience, there hasn't been any kind of like, oh, we don't want anything from 1970 backwards. It's just, what have you got? What can we have?
I think in the news world, the archives they're really valuable, aren't they? For AI companies. Lots of deals are happening all the time with the big newspaper archives. So that for them, the older stuff is really valuable, I think.
Right.
I wanted to touch on something that you said a minute ago about authors and, how authors can feel, and rightly so, very proprietary about their work, whether it's a journal article or a book. I do think it's important to bring all participants in the publishing ecosystem along in this journey. It's super complex in many levels, but it can also be understood, especially as you start experimenting with AI tools yourselves. But that's something that we've tried to focus on, is bringing our authors along, holding, webinars and providing information. So there just isn't confusion about what's going on. That's not to anyone's advantage.
I think that's a really important part, actually, and something that we need to talk about is, authors don't read their contracts. They don't know what rights they've given away. They often think they have rights that they don't. And the more we can educate them on, what we're doing and how we're doing it in their best interest, because let's be honest, most of this content is probably already in somewhere, and they may as well get remunerated for it because they'll get royalties from these deals. So the more we can educate them on that, I think the better. And they might be more willing to sort of come along for the ride if they realize that is the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we saw instances, obviously, of authors, even in situations where they had indeed signed copyright assignment agreements over to their publishers, who were very upset by the idea that this happened. And I think what you're looking at here is some people, and there's a few more sprinkled around in the room, some people who can see a positive side to AI and who feel that it's has potential to really revolutionize certain aspects of what we're doing in the world today, and that it's not, the first thing we think of is not the robots are taking my job. Not that we shouldn't also consider that, but there are positive aspects to AI, and I think that doesn't rise to the surface that often. The idea that authors don't know what they've signed. I just always also want to go back to the idea that none of us are in this business to keep things a secret. Like we're publishers, public, we're not privishers, private. We're trying to, nobody, no author ever said, like, here it is, please bring it out, please pay me a whole boatload of money and don't tell anyone about it at all. So I realize that's a little bit absurd in the face of what is potentially happening with content in a big AI, but it's also important to remember, what is our job? What are we doing? Why are we here?
I think publishers need a like strong voice about this, and they need a good narrative, because there is a lot of rubbish going on with AI and copyright theft and all of that. So like, it's really important that we can demonstrate that there are some really cool, good things that we can do with it, that we can license. This has always been the thing of, right, rights and licensing is solutions to the new tech, right? It's just like, the photocopier came along and the internet and text and data mining, and you work out a solution to make that work. If we don't, then we're going to run into a load of trouble, because well, firstly, it's happening anyway. But secondly, legislation will, if we can't demonstrate that we've got an ecosystem here and that we can do it, legislation is just going to come along and it's going to be out of our hands. I mean, that could happen anyway, but we need to work really hard, like all publishers across all sectors, to have a really strong voice on this, where we like remind everyone of the value of our content. I don't know if you've ever asked one of like ChatGPT or something about something that you like know really a lot about. So like not travel plans and not like the age of some celebrity or something, but if it's something like, so I asked ChatGPT quite a lot about open access because I know a lot about that, and it's almost everything was wrong, so it is really worth bearing that in mind. Like, it's fine to use those tools for some stuff, but for everyone's professional lives, you need to be really careful. So again, as publishers, that is a message that we need to be shouting about, I think.
And I think the Copyright Office, at least in the United States, published some guidance earlier this week talking about the scope of copyright protection for AI-generated content and prompts and so forth. And very much to your point, an author, content creator still has copyright protection for what they have created, but anything generated solely by AI, isn't original enough with expressive elements to warrant copyright protection. And I think another, you started out by saying, let's not be scared of this ecosystem. And it's not much different from what people in rights or licensing, whether in legal or in sales or whatever, have been doing for many years.
Right.
It's just another outlet. So the same issues are at play. Do we have the rights? What are we comfortable licensing? Does it work for the partner? Does it work for our rights holder? All of that. But then also what's fascinating is how authors can really take advantage of AI in the manuscript preparation process, how publishers, peer reviewers can take advantage of AI by using some integrity screening tools. So AI has a role all through the publishing journey. And that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's not just licensing and the output that's generated from that, but from soup to nuts, AI has a role.
And if you can see the value of that in your own company, like if you're using tools, then be mindful that you should also consider licensing for tools, because you can see the value of them. This isn't one of my other big mantras, is like, don't do things with people's content that you wouldn't be prepared to license out yourselves. And I think that is very much that.
Yeah, I am finding when I'm talking to publishing companies, that it's the same group of people. This is one of the first times this has happened. I can remember how hard I worked, for example, to get the people who are granting permission to outside companies. Somebody comes to us, they want permission to use something, and I'm telling them they can have this much for that much. And then my editors in the same company were going to that very same company and asking them for content. And they were being told they could have this much for that much, but they wanted more. My company had a policy. You need to get all rights. You need to get tons of rights for permission, because we want to be able to make whatever kind of cool book we want to make. So you've got to go get it. And still over here, they're saying, no, it's only this much for that much. And so when we finally got the editorial teams and the rights teams together and got to the place where you've got to give as good as you get, or you'll get as good as you give, maybe that was a better way to say it. This now on AI feels like it's more integrated in publishing companies. So people are sitting in groups talking about, how are we going to use AI in our processes, all of our processes, the production process, the shipping and inventory process, the pricing and et cetera, and what are we holding in terms of content that might be super useful for other people to have access to, so that they can build great tools. And that, because that's coming from one voice, almost one group that's really thinking about both sides, it's made a lot of difference. And it's essential, because this is moving so much faster and things are changing so much. And we are operating in a world where, I can say things because I'm not a lawyer and don't work for a company, where it's clear people stole stuff. People stole
no
stuff.
secret.
Yeah, no one knew that, right?
Yeah.
So people stole stuff. So also, I'm going to say, I've been in many situations in my career in publishing, and many of you rights people have taken the black hat bad guy and turned him into a white hat good guy by licensing him. Did you pirate my book? Did you steal my book? Are you publishing my book in a product or a territory that you weren't allowed to do it in? I never said you could do that. Well, you did it. You have money that you made from that. Pay me that money, which would have been mine by rights if we'd had a license. I'm staring at Megan, and I'll give you a license that'll make this legal. And plus, you can do more when we have a legal relationship. So we do that. We do that as rights people. We're all about the make it right. Get right with the copyright gods. We can help you do that. So it's an attitude that we have of trying to do it. And again, to me, just another example. We're trying to help those poor AI companies get right with the copyright guide. Okay, that was
And
much.
it's really the best thing we can do is to legitimize the use of content by entering agreements. I
Yeah.
feel like we all have a duty to open those conversations.
Yeah. The opposite situation is, as you mentioned, Jess, I think it was you who said, there could be a ruling. Well, I'll go back to my permissions example. For years, permissions was a bottleneck. And you couldn't answer questions soon enough. And somebody would apply for permissions and they'd get a message back. It still happens today. They get a message back and say, thank you very much for your permissions inquiry. We're so happy you'd like to be our customer and pay us money, but we'll get back to you in 6 weeks or maybe longer. And then when you finally got to a point where you could turn those answers around more quickly, you found that more people asked for permission. Everybody wants to be right. They don't want to take, but if it's going to take 6 weeks or 6 months and I'm going to have published or given my course or made my speech to all the CEOs, I just took it and hoped you didn't catch me. Not me, don't come sue me. You know what I mean? So now you made right with that. Now we have an opportunity where somebody could say, a legal person, a judge could say, look, these publishers, they say they have value and that they're doing stuff, but it takes them so long and they're not good at it. And so, yeah, fair use seems right to me. We want to avoid that. We want to be on top of our licensing and be able to make deals, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that is a big concern right now for UK publishers. There's a lot of chatter going on about a government exception, and that is slightly terrifying. So like Jess said, we kind of all just need to come together and show there is a legitimate licensing model available. We don't need an exception for this.
Yeah.
I think as well, so I'm not very much not a techie person, but my understanding is that these are data systems that maybe we as publishers need to push people to have a bit more of a data trail of what they're doing. And I don't know if that is really possible with everything, but they like some sort of an audit that you could do to be like, well, yes, this is an output here, and these are the things that have generated it, which could offer a level of accountability, that might help, and I feel like that could help authors.
Yes. Are we
Be
in
more
the world of
comfortable.
attribution now? We're
Yeah.
saying, couldn't these companies, instead of just gobbling it up and spitting it out and acting like they created it, couldn't they point to?
Instead of being like, we hate all of this, don't do this, you could be like, this is what we want to try and get out of this. And from my perspective, that would be useful, but could be, sometimes I say that to more techie people and they just look at me and that isn't really how it works. But I feel like the underlying data must be there somewhere.
And it's part of the EU AI Act is that tech providers will need to provide the sources of their content at some point, but I think it is absolutely in everyone's interest. And even as a publisher or someone part of that ecosystem, you want to know the source of your authors and licensors' content as well. So everyone has an interest in knowing the extent to which AI has leveraged original authorship. Whether it can get too granular or whether that's really necessary, I don't know. But at least when applying for copyright registration in the United States, you do need to show some level of detail about how AI was used in generating a work.
Yeah, I think Todd's going to talk to us a little bit about this too. I just want to go back to one last point and then we're going to move. In all the deals we make when we're rights people, you come to a contract, you've signed a contract, and then there's the after deal care. And I just want to touch on, they came, they asked for all of your content, and then they wanted files. How did that go for you?
Terribly. I think this is if I could give advice to anybody, it's before you even get approached, find out what content you have. What format is it in? Where does it live? Can you practically deliver it? Because that was a nightmare for us. We didn't know where half this content was, whether it was retrievable. Every company wants a different format. There doesn't really seem to be any kind of standard with that. So yeah, just try and get your content in order? And can you quantify it? Because we talk about tokens and words. You need to be able to say, this is how many words we have in our portfolio.
Yeah.
You know, and if you don't know where that is,
No, the
you've got no shot.
the first time we were asked that, how many words, everyone's mouths just were like, what? Like, what? And we had to get some people to like check a few articles and like work it out. Which is absolutely insane, isn't it? And then the margin for error is like with that is really big.
Yeah.
The files, this was the thing I always remember with the text and data mining stuff, where we were like, it's not that big a deal to license for people to do that for commercial or non-commercial purposes, but it's how are they going to get the files? And when people say they want to do text and data mining, and this is probably a bit the same with AI, I sometimes do say to them, are you sure you want to be the curator of all of this copyrighted content? Because now it's on you to do the right thing, like do whatever you need to do with it. And then are you going to destroy it? Are you going to keep it in a safe place somewhere so that someone else can't get their hands on it? That was the thing with that was really difficult. And then for publishers, it's a lot of work delivering that stuff. And there's usually a cost involved in that we, you know, depending on who you are, you'd probably pass on. So I always think, but then I think there's maybe a role for third parties to play in that. Like, you know, we was talking the other day when like the aggregators have all the content, like there is probably a role that they could play in that space, as well as like some of the, you know, all the big repositories of open access content and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do we even have time for questions, or should we move to Todd and do questions at the end? I lost track of my planner though. Are there questions from out there that you'd like to ask? I'll bring you a microphone.
Thank you. Okay, first, excuse how I asked this question. I'm in acquisitions, so I feel like a little bit of an interloper. So I might not have the right language. But I'm curious about the contracts that you have for your content, whether that's journals or books. When you look at them, what is like the language or the phrase that tells you who has the right to license this out? For example, like a lot of our projects or a lot of our books, we own the copyright, but a lot more the author owns the copyright. So how do we know if we can give the EPUB to an AI company?
Who wants to take this?
You're the
legal, some legal.
Consult your own lawyer.
Generally, I mean, it is very contract specific, and we're talking about rights that could be characterized as electronic rights. They could be characterized as distribution rights, as adaptation rights. It really depends on the use cases by the AI company and then the phrasing in the contract. That's what I'll say.
You touched on a couple of requirements or restrictions that you could put into such licenses, like non-exclusivity and requiring attribution. Are there other things that you're seeing that you would recommend or that you're doing yourselves in terms of restrictions or requirements?
I think something we've been thinking a lot about is output, and is it a public display output? Because especially when we're talking about books, you know, you want to assess the risk for your own business. So you don't want the AI to be able to spit out an entire book because then nobody's going to buy it, right? So is thinking about a public display of an output is something I would really consider, because then you're kind of cutting off your own business.
So you'd want to be back thinking about things like you can't create a competing product, right, with the outputs.
Mm-hmm.
What about like translations, things in other languages? What about what a lot of people are into is like summaries, article summaries or summaries of, you know, and is that something that you like? A lot of publishers are doing that themselves now using AI tools. You don't want to compete. You don't really want to compete with yourselves. So it's all, there's lots of stuff like that that you can think about.
And there is some complexity with attribution, just to clarify. So attribution in the training process is quite difficult unless there's a general reference to the source of the content that went in for training. But because it's all happening behind the scenes, it wouldn't make sense necessarily to have attribution for straight training licenses. But where you're talking about a license that might permit public display, that might permit for retrieval augmented generation so that the output is either verbatim content or drawn heavily from the original copyrighted material. That's a more obvious place for the attribution.
You might actually not want to be attributed. Like we have to be really careful with the RCN's brand because they're the nursing union and professional body in the UK. The last thing we want is some mad output that references them. You know, that would be really, really problematic. I mean, it's problematic for, you know, for everyone, but we are always really careful with that.
All right, I can take one more question and you are closest. There's time after for more talk.
If there's a term associated with the license, how do you enforce the term if it's fed into an AI model and it isn't continually used for further training? Or once it's used, how do you take it out of that trained AI model?
I mean, you can't, right? Is the short answer. But most of these models, they bring out updated versions. You know, we're on ChatGPT 4 or something. So I think it would more be that the content then can't be used in the next iteration of that model, but it can never be removed or deleted, in my understanding.
Yeah,
And it might be able to be removed or deleted. I'm not sure, but yes, you would put a time box around the length of time for training.
I think this is like quite a lot of licensing for larger amounts of content where the term isn't necessarily a time of, you know, a period of time. It might be more linked to a stage in the process. And I don't think that's just an AI thing. I think there's other licensing that we do that would be more like that as well.
I got dispensation for one more question.
Thank you. I'll see if I can articulate what I want to know. So I guess like most of you sit sort of in the academic research space and there's peer review. So, and have spoken about disseminating knowledge being sort of mission driven. Is there any, and then so I think like impact obviously of research is important in addition to making money. Is there any sort of thought to how this information being applied to these large models and sort of further disseminated into the world can be monitored or tracked for like broader impact? Because I feel like that's like really the value is more quality information, but I'm just curious.
I have a couple thoughts about that. So we did talk about whether providers will start disclosing, and I think they will be obligated to do so under certain regulations for the source of their content. I have also heard that many companies are looking for ways to embed data so that it can be tracked all the way through. But I also see this as when you're talking about just training a model, you are helping improve the accuracy of that baseline model to hopefully remove more of the miscitings or misattribution to, you know, Jessica's organization. But then when you get to actually citing to the contributor, if that's something you want, if that's something that you negotiated, that's really great too, because the author, the publisher, whomever is associated with that content, you are furthering the reach of their research and discovery. But to me, it is all an extension of disseminating
I think it depends.
quality content.
It depends a bit on the scope of the project as well. Like, I think we keep still just constantly thinking about like the chat GPTs and that kind of thing. Very difficult really to monitor with that. But some people are doing really targeted projects where it is quite easy to attribute or to link up to the original sources or to use them. You know, it's part of the academic journey of the evolution of that thing that you're doing. So if you think about that more like projects or science experiments that people are doing, I think that is different. And yeah.
Great.
To add.
Thank you very much, everybody.